Thank you so much, and thank you to all of you for being here. My apologies for any issues you had getting into the House of Commons. They can be a bit difficult at sometimes, but I want to talk about how we hear so much at the moment from the political class, mainly about putting the country on a war footing. And we're told things like we're all going to be speaking Russian if we don't buck up our ideas. Now, it was a Labour government that developed the UK's first nuclear bomb with a bloody Union Jack on top of it. That was what then Foreign Secretary Ernest Bevin, how he put it at the time. It wasn't the finest achievement of that government, but it's important, I think, to reflect on the paradox that the same government laid the foundations of Britain as a modern welfare state, council homes, the NHS, social security, comprehensive education, and it also laid the foundations of Britain as a modern nuclear state. It could do both things in the past, but now we're being presented an idea that it's a trade-off between the two. More defence means less social interventions. Now, since the Second World War, the consensus amongst the political classes that nuclear weapons were the price that Britain had to pay to secure our status in the world. And even as the empire was falling, the winds of change were blowing and national independence movements were winning the day. Successive governments weren't just stockpiling nuclear weapons to attain parity with other great powers like the US or the USSR, but to hold down those countries, which it did not. It was not about deterrence, and if I had more time, I'd actually go into why it wasn't about deterrence and how it's a ridiculous argument. It was about domination. Having nukes meant a permanent place on the UN Security Council, among other things, but we live in a changing world, and the post-war consensus collapsed, and the welfare state with it. There is almost a zombie quality to the way our ruling classes continue to churn out nuclear armaments as if longing for the certainty of a bygone era. And meanwhile, global majority countries are fighting for our planet's future. The UN Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons came into force, banning the use of nuclear weapons under international law. Now, nuclear weapons have always been immoral, and under this treaty, they are meant to be illegal too. The TPNW has been signed by 122 countries so far, but not the UK, which refuses to do so. And, you know, we've heard some evidence there are some countries, particularly those in the global south, which are, it seems, kind of threatened with aid in terms of whether or not they sign it. And I worry that this will be no more likely under the current government, because ratifying this treaty would require stockpiles to be dismantled, or at least a viable proposal for disarmament. The TPNW exposes the nuclear division between the global north and the global south, and the racist foundations of who is and who is deemed not fit to use and stockpile nuclear weapons. We're also seeing this in the discussion around the Israeli-American war against Iran. Israel's nuclear capabilities are the worst kept secret in the world. Western governments never openly acknowledge them. Even the supposedly factual BBC pretends that they do not exist. Now, towards the start of Israel's ongoing genocide in Gaza, we even saw one far-right Israeli minister advocate quite seriously for dropping a nuke on the territory. We're now expected to cheer the bombing of Iran, despite their approach to nuclear weapons, whilst non-nuclear states look on, drawing the same conclusion that it's actually a very good example of why we need to build nuclear weapons. But the entire history of nuclear weapons is a history of asymmetric power, double standards, and inequality. We can't disentangle the history of nuclear weaponry from the history of racism and imperialism. Imperial powers became nuclear powers and pulled the drawbridge, or attempted to, up behind them. You could fairly point out that the main nuclear antagonists remained the US and Russia, and that nuclear bombs ultimately threatened the entirety of humanity. But that doesn't reckon with the real history of where nuclear weapons have actually been tested, which countries they have been used against, and who is deemed trustworthy to possess them. The major nuclear powers first tested weapons on areas in dependent territories and colonies inhabited by disenfranchised communities and indigenous peoples. New Mexico, Nevada, the Marshall Islands, Montebello Island, Maralinga, Emu Field in Australia, Kazakhstan, Algeria, French Polynesia. These were designated as sacrifice zones by politicians in the imperial core, viewed as a terra nullius. Now, communities living in them ended up suffering devastating humanitarian and health consequences as a result of this testing. Children in these communities suffered congenital abnormalities, and the materials used in the atom bombs were frequently extracted by indigenous communities from colonized countries who live with the consequences of exposure from uranium mining. An American Centers for Disease Control and Prevention report from as recently as 2015 revealed that children born to Navajo parents still carry traces of uranium in their bodies as a legacy of this. Nuclear weapons are a crucial pillar of imperialism and racism, whose mere existence, let alone deployment, perpetuates harm against global majority communities. So at its core, the struggle to dismantle nuclear weapons is an internationalist and anti-racist struggle. And we must centre and pay tribute to the efforts of those same affected communities at the forefront of anti-nuclear struggles. And I'll leave you with this. This is something which Martin Luther King Jr. said. He said, what will be the ultimate value of having established social justice in a context where all people, Negro and white, are merely free to face destruction by atomic war? Thank you.
Thank you, Hiroshimas.